Hello, everybody, and welcome to Casualty Connect, our video series on the intersection between artificial intelligence and casualty insurance. I am Frank Giaoui, the CEO of Optimalex, and today our distinguished guest speaker is Kevin Mead. Hi, Kevin.
Hi, Frank. Hope you're well.
Yes, thank you for being with us today. Kevin, you are the CEO of the Vermont Captive Insurance Association, which is a trade association representing captive owners, managers, and service providers in the captive insurance industry. The subject today that you chose to describe with us and our audience is the evolution of the captive insurance market. And so, may I ask you maybe an introductory question? Can you please first describe what is a captive insurance and why does this kind of structure appeal particularly to medical professional liability insurance carriers and healthcare professionals?
Thanks, Frank. Yeah, so at its most basic and elemental level, a captive insurance company is an insurance company solely owned by the parent, solely owned for the purposes of insuring only that parent company's risk. And the applicability and the appeal of that in the medical malpractice area is a greater level of control over the risk because of the fact that you are not effectively pricing that risk in an open insurance market. You're instead pricing that risk internally based on your own risk profile.
Okay, understood. And so why does that appeal particularly to healthcare professionals and self-insured?
I think it's partly that control issue, and also, at least initially, it was a market reaction when the coverage became either unavailable or the conditions and pricing were untenable for
Right.
those seeking insurance. And so captive insurance became an alternative that they sought to use in order to address those issues around availability and pricing.
That's true. That happened for the MPL market in the mid 80s and also early 2000s. So I guess this is another reason.
Yes, and it's not surprising that if you say the early 80s, that coincides with the foundation of Vermont as a captive domicile, and indeed provided the first impetus for captives in Vermont.
Absolutely. So I was told that Vermont has long been a leader in captives. What makes it such a strong domicile for captives in general and for MedMal in particular?
Well, I think the first part is the expertise within the regulatory environment. There are over 30 specialist captive regulators in the Vermont Department of Financial Regulation, the DFR, and they deal solely with captive issues. They're not dealing with commercial insurance.
Hmm.
Uh, and those folks have longevity in the area as well. They've also, using the VCIA, established strong relationships with the service providers and industry so that there is a mutual understanding of what industry needs in terms of effective regulation of the captives. And then that's then led to an infrastructure in Vermont that frankly doesn't exist anywhere else, in that you can have one stop where you meet with your attorney, your lawyer, you meet with your actuary, you meet with your auditor, you meet with your captive manager and other professionals that are supporting your captive. And then I think thirdly, beyond that, is that Vermont's always had an emphasis on innovation. So the regulations are updated every year as new tools come online, for example, analytics, other ways of financing risk within captives, because there are nuances within captives, and the application of technology.
I understand. Okay, so there are some other domicile, but really Vermont gathers probably 50% of the market, I was told.
Yeah, probably within the US, it's up at around that level in terms of written premium. And certainly Vermont has a specialization in the larger, more complex captives, again, supported by that professional and regulatory infrastructure that we have.
Okay. So now maybe it's a good time to tell us how you have observed the evolution of the role of captive insurance in general, and more particularly in the professional liability sector over the past decade, maybe?
Yeah, so I think in general, it's been a result of a growing sophistication within risk managers in general that they have options outside of just going to a broker for coverage in areas, everything as diverse as obviously we talk about the medical malpractice area, but also property, also liability, and then some interesting things that gets put into captives, like, for example, insurance over handsets by mobile phone companies is one thing that gets put into captives. So as that sophistication's grown in the market, that's been one thing driving the push for more attention being paid to captives as a solution. I think a second thing is that there's been a generalized hardening in the marketplace. I think a third thing is that there has been an increased use of analytics, and people have, within a captive, greater access to details surrounding their own claim experience. And so they can apply that to their own captive calculations to make sure that they are adequately reserving, and they're not effectively outsourcing that capability through the premium payment that they undertake. And I think also there's a desire on the part of a lot of organizations to see if they can't somehow be more proactive with risk, and rather than just again outsource it through the payment of premiums, bring risk in-house and address risk at a root cause by reducing it rather than just making it a claims process.
Okay, so really many factors that you put forward. Let's unfold some of them now. And maybe starting with the biggest challenges that captive owners and managers face today in medical malpractice risk.
So obviously the one that has to go right at the top of the list is the actual claim severity. So it's not just volume of claim, it's actually the severity of those claims. They actually get referred to as nuclear verdicts. And the reason they get referred to as nuclear verdicts is that they can be very destructive to the organization that's found to be liable for that particular incident. And so as a consequence, we actually do quite a lot of education within the VCIA about nuclear verdicts and how you can prevent those.
Yeah.
In addition, coupled with that are the rising costs of defense and legal complexity. And one of the things that we're seeing within legal complexity is actually the funding of lawsuits by venture capital. Right. So rather than the fact that someone is bringing a lawsuit and the law firm is working on a contingency basis, instead there is actual venture capital money going into supporting the filing of lawsuits. And obviously venture capital is looking for a return, and that could be driving up claim severity.
Yeah,
I think also...
sorry, Kevin, the so-called third-party litigation funders.
Exactly that. And then I think there are challenges within data because as the data surrounding claims becomes more detailed, I think there is a problem with inconsistent or incomplete data. And so as a consequence, both the commercial carriers and also the captives are seeking more complete data surrounding their claims experience so that that can drive back into risk management. I think there are regulatory pressures because of the size of some of those claims, and there are definitely concerns which I've seen elsewhere, but not within Vermont, about the financial viability of captives as those claims increase in severity and number. And then I think there's a need for better kind of predictive analysis on where claims as a whole are going in order that you can ensure that you are adequately reserved within your captive going forwards.
Let me pick up on your last point here about predictive analytics. How important do you see predictive analytics into helping captives manage med-mal claims today? I would say med-mal in general.
Yeah, and I think the short answer is that for that is to take it from a retrospective
Yeah,
where the data tells you what's happened with your claims experience to where the data is instead predicting what's going to happen in the future with your claims experience based on your past history. And that model gets refined almost instantaneously as new data about old claims comes in, and as those new claims come in, you are refining your predictor as to where your future claims exposure goes. And I think that's going to be critical in the captive world for ensuring that they are correctly reserving and that they are correctly anticipating claims volume and claim severity.
right. Because I guess when you build a captive or you manage a captive, by definition, you don't have the external benchmark. You are doing your own claims with your own policy. And so, in order to reassure your team that you are not out of track, this kind of analytics can help.
Yeah, and certainly if there was a way of aggregating data without obviously disclosing individual information, but there was a way of seeing if your captive, your entity was on par with industry or was in fact ahead or behind, that then gives actionable information to management for them to take further detailed action on.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Anything else you see for analytics?
I think it's just that the demand is there from the captive boards that they need what they're looking for, what everyone is looking for is predictability.
Yeah.
And the more detailed you can get and um, the more distant you can get with valid predictability, the happier those captive boards are going to be.
More generally, did you see other applications or use cases in captive from AI? I mean, AI today is what we call general or generative AI or large language modeling. So it's very popular. Everybody speaks about them over the last 2 years. I mean, it was always among the top rated subjects in any conference, including yours, by the way, next
Yeah.
August. So, any other use cases from AI?
Yeah, I think that one of the ones that I find the most interesting is that one that I referred to earlier, which is benchmarking.
Yeah.
You correctly point out that captives, unfortunately, do exist within their own internal bubble. And so if you could aggregate that data and use it to be predictive across an entire category of captives, then that would be hugely beneficial. And I think also integrating analytics with the actual claims settlement process would be good because then the folks that are in charge of settling these detailed and complex claims have a little more than their gut feeling and their intuition to work on. They've actually got a set of data that they can rely upon that can both predict likely outcomes should things go to litigation or can provide them with guidance on what sort of ranges they should be settling in. And I see that as being a massive way forwards.
Okay, thank you. So, Kevin, we may have the time for one or two more questions. One more general question we have is you are an expert in captive, and some of our audience are interested and intrigued by how they can use captive structure for their healthcare organization or healthcare providers when they are considering forming a captive to manage, for instance, med malpractice risk. What kind of advice could you give them?
I think they've got to go into a huge learning mode, first of all. The good news is there are lots of avenues for that, including our own conference to go into learning mode. Excuse me. There are other conferences and events. There are service providers that can provide education while they're also trying to steer you towards their solutions, obviously. But there is a very strong level of education you should undertake first. And the reason for that is that, first of all, captives have to be seen as a long-term solution. If
Okay.
you're seeking to use a captive to fix what I might term short-term premium shock, it's really not a good idea. Because one of the first things you have to do is build a feasibility study. And that feasibility study is going to look at your claims history, it's going to look at your premium history, and it's going to devise a way in which you could establish a captive.
Right.
And it's fair to say that a lot of potential captives fall short at that stage because
Right.
they're unable to make that long-term case within a feasibility study that makes sense to go through the, frankly, time and expense of establishing a captive.
Yeah, there is a critical mass to reach. There is an initial investment before returning on this investment, right? So you cannot do that by chance. It's a real strategic decision.
Exactly. And obviously, MedMal, because of the size and complexity of the claims issues that then occur, is one of the more difficult use cases for a captive. Again, if we were talking about a phone company wanting to put its handset insurance into a captive, that's a relatively easy thing to be predictive about as to how many handsets get lost or damaged during the course of a year, what the claims volume is, how you replace them. That's a relatively simple use case. When we're talking about certainly a multi-service, multi-site, perhaps, medical service provider like a hospital chain
Yeah.
or a chain of doctors' offices, then there are numerous different risk profiles in place there that would need to be assessed in order to get yourself through that feasibility study. So you'd need really experienced people to help you through that.
Okay. Anything next?
And then I think you've also got to look at your culture.
Okay.
And one of the great advantages of going to commercial is that you just go here and you just sort of hand it over and there's a safety and satisfaction that comes with just handing over the entire administration of it. So you've got to look internally and say to yourself, do we have a culture and do we have the internal capability to bring that in-house and move that out of the commercial environment, not only potentially then putting the risk into the captive, but also adjusting our internal culture to be much more of a risk aware organization, much more of a risk managed organization, and adopt all the processes and procedures that need to be in place around that.
Okay, I see. Well, thank you for those pieces of advice. Very, very helpful. Maybe we can conclude with speaking and introducing the VCIA conference, which will happen in Burlington in August. Can you tell us a little bit more for our audience?
Yeah, it will be our 40th anniversary conference this year, Frank. So we're looking forwards to that.
Happy
Uh,
birthday.
and yes, it will be good. And by the way, that makes the VCIA 3 years younger than the captive legislation in Vermont. So we were very early established after that legislation came into place. And last year we had nearly 1,100 people attend the conference.
I can witness.
Yes, you were there. That's right. And it was very well attended. The education sessions were very well supported. The social events that we had were very well supported. We have a great marketplace with over 70 vendors. So if you had an interest in captives, it's a great place to come to start that educational process and potentially to start to build the relationships with those service providers that you'll need as you go through a feasibility study and towards implementation.
Yeah, I agree. And I can witness it was instructive, educational, but also fun. And there was this kind of network building, very casual, very, very sweet to share during the 3 days I was there.
And I think we were fortunate last year that we had great weather, and we're certainly hoping we can dial that in for this year as well.
Well, thank you very much, Kevin. So, our distinguished guest speaker, Kevin Mead, is, as you understood, the CEO of the VCIA. And this is Casualty Connect, our video series about artificial intelligence and casualty insurance. I am Frank Giaoui, CEO of Optimalex. I'll see you soon. Thank you very much. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.